Alright folks, this is Mr. Kimpton, and this is going to be a video on one of my favorite topics, clouds, and how clouds form. So we see them almost all the time, but what are clouds and how do they form? The best way to explain what a cloud is to explain how it forms. So how does a cloud form? Well, you need four things. First, you need water vapor, which is now a liquid or solid, so ice crystals. So clouds are really condensed water vapor, so tiny little water droplets, or they are deposited water vapor in the form of ice crystals. The higher up you go, they're more likely ice crystals. The lower you are, seasonally it depends, but they're more likely tiny little water droplets. The second thing you need is you actually need humid air, very humid air. Relative humidity is near 100%. I'm not going to go into the details of humidity. You can go check out that video that was done by Mr. Gilbert. Three, you need condensation nuclei. That's just a real fancy way to say a small particle of dust, salt, pollution. You need something for that water to condense onto or deposit onto. And then the last thing that you need is you need uplifted air. So you need air with moisture moving up. As it goes up in the troposphere, it's going to cool and either condense or deposit to give us what we see as a cloud. So how do we cool that air in order for a cloud to appear? Well, there's really five main cooling mechanisms or ways that we can cool air. They have to be cooled below the dew point temperature. So where you see a cloud in the sky, that's someplace where the dew point temperature has been reached. So cooling occurs by convectional lifting. We've talked a lot about convection. Convergent lifting, frontal lifting, orographic lifting, which is just because of mountains, and then advection radiation. So we're going to talk about each one of these very briefly so you can get an idea of how they're a little bit different from each other. So convectional lifting is just the lifting of warm air with moisture in it on the warm side of convection. So you have cold or cooler dense air going towards the surface. It warms up across the surface of the land, just like we've talked a lot about, and it rises. And as it rises, that water vapor is going to cool and condense or deposit, and you get a cloud. Another way is by convergence. So just the fact that you have air, wind moving from high to low pressure, and if that is meeting up even before low pressure forms, you can call that convergent air, which then kickstarts low pressure, and you essentially have convection again. I don't know why they really call it different, but you can have convergence of air, and it may not be a part of a convection cycle, but because of mountains and valleys and difference in elevation, you can suddenly get convergence of air, which then creates a new low pressure. Another way is because of the fronts, or where we have two or more air masses meeting together that differ by temperature and humidity. We'll be talking about air masses if you haven't already studied that in detail. But here we have a continental polar air mass, so it's cool and dry, and we have that running into or fighting against a warm maritime tropical. So that would be warm air with significant humidity. That difference in temperature along the frontal boundary, this would be a cold front example, would cause significant cloud development. So this is why when watching the weather, especially on a weather map, you will see clouds forming usually in a line or in a large grouping in and around fronts. Another way to get clouds to form in uplift air is to have a mountain in the way. So that air is not going to go through the mountain. It's going to do whatever it possibly can to go up and over and around that structure of Earth. And easiest way is to go up, particularly if it's warming and or has moisture. The fifth way that we can get clouds to form are these two terms that you'll hear quite a bit, particularly with the formation of fog, which fog is just a cloud on the ground, and that is advection. So when you have warm, wet air flowing over a cold surface, you can get what is called advection fog. We can see this actually quite a bit here in Minnesota, and we can also see radiational fog, or where the ground cools by radiation and the fog forms as that air cools. So the ground loses the heat by radiation, and the cold layer of air near the ground causes fog to form. So that's about it. That's the 5 ways to get air to uplift and make a cloud.